are really happy today to be hosting this event on peace building and stable societies. We've got a really expert panel. We also invited USAID to join us today, and they sent their regrets. They would have liked to have had their voice in the room, but it just wasn't possible. The event, Exploring the Security Development Nexus, the Importance of Peace Building and Stable Societies. We have another experiment with the format. We're trying a talk show format, and we would really love to hear your opinions about how well that works for you. So if you could take a minute after the session today and talk to any of the SID staff, and I'll point them out to you, and at the same time applaud them for all of the work they do every day to bring more services, create better programs. Joe Foyer, our Executive Director, Stacy Whittle, our Program Communications Officer, and Janine Kamweni, is she in the room? Right over there. Hi, Janine. And Manoli Strecker. He's outside. Anyway, oh, there he is in the back of the room. If you could just go up to any one of them afterwards and share your views about how this format works, that would be terrific. We would love to have your feedback on that. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Eric Ham, who is the Security and Development Workgroup co-chair, helped to put this session together today. Also Stacy Whittle, who's already said hello, and Zoe Cooprider from the Institute for Economics and Peace. They all did a lot of work to make this happen, and I know it's going to be a great event. I'd also like to introduce our moderator today, Bill Taylor, Ambassador Bill Taylor. And you have in the packets that you came in with a bio on him, and you can see that he has a very impressive background. He joined the U.S. Institute of Peace in October of 2009 as Vice President for the Center for Post-Conflict Peace and Stability Operations. He's a graduate of West Point and Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and has served in posts in hotspots like Iraq, Afghanistan, the Middle East, and the former Soviet Union. Most recently, he served as U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine from 2006 to 2009. And I encourage you to read the rest of his bio because he's really had some amazing assignments, and you will see from taking a quick peek at them that he is very well placed to be the moderator today.
Betsy, thank you very much. It's great to be part of SID, and it's a great group that you've both assembled here, and I'm excited to hear from John and Steve. The nexus, as you can see by the title, Exploring the Security Development Nexus. I mean, this connection, I think, between security on one side and development on the other is a perfect topic for SID. And I'm very glad that you've focused on it. And I know that Eric has done a lot of work putting these concepts together. A word or two about this nexus, I think, just to start us off. Many in the community that Betsy described, in the development community, have a lot of experience in development around the world. Many times, in many instances, in many countries, this is development that extends over a longer period of time, that has the luxury in some sense, as well as an urgency, but an opportunity over a longer period of time to do projects, to execute projects that will come to fruition over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20. USAID, who I understand is not in the room, but probably there are some alum of USAID in the room, USAID has been working in some countries for as long as they've been in existence. So this is what I've called unopposed development. So this is development where you've got the luxury, and AID and NGOs, other international organizations have the opportunity to do things that take time but that have an institutional and a long-term effect. Unopposed development. There's also something that Dave Kilcullen has talked about in terms of opposed development. And opposed development, now we're getting into this connection, this link, this nexus between security and development, because there are some places that many people in this room have probably participated in, where there is an opposition to development. And we talked about Afghanistan as one, of course, and Iraq is another, and there are others that we can talk about. But in this case, in the case of opposed development, you've got another organization, another entity. Maybe it's the Taliban, maybe it's the Sunni insurgents who are opposed to the government of Afghanistan, the government of Iraq, and donors and international developers who are trying to help that host country provide services and develop itself so that the government at all levels can provide services to its people, its citizens, whether these services are education or health or economic development, security, justice. These are the kinds of things that the governments that we are trying to help develop, and they are trying to develop themselves, are trying to provide services to those citizens. So that's opposed development. And here you have, and again, this connection between security and development, where you have opposed development, you are likely to have the US military or a coalition military or some other military trying to provide security. And when they try to provide security, whether it's in Iraq, and you can picture the role of the coalition in Iraq, trying to provide security to the people and provide the security to the developers. Same thing going on now as we see every day in the paper in Afghanistan, the US military, and that's actually a broad coalition of international countries who are working on this effort, are trying to provide security to Afghanistan so that there can be development. Because in the end, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan and other places, it is a transition that we are looking for. It's not we're not shooting to be there for a long time. The United States, the other coalition partners, not planning to be in Afghanistan for a long time. What we are trying to do is help the government of Afghanistan develop its own capabilities to provide the services, health, education, justice, security, economic development, so that it can take over. And that the international community, having done its job, other security benefits of Al-Qaeda and those kind of things would come with that. But that's our goal, is to get out. So opposed development is development. Some people, maybe in this room, and I'm hoping we can get some discussion of this, some people may object to the notion that what we're trying to do today in Afghanistan, that I'm calling opposed development. Some people say, well, wait a minute, that's not development. That's something else. That is stabilization. And let's not get too bogged down in definitions, but I know that there will be some resistance to this notion of opposed development. Nonetheless, we are seeing both USAID, DFID, the UN, and the coalition, the US military, the Canadian military, the British military, other allied militaries trying to do things that look a lot like development. They look a lot like road building, and they're building some schools, and they're building health clinics. So there is something going on there. If you call it development, fine. If you want to call it stabilization, that's fine. But nonetheless, there is a need for the civilians and the military to be working together somehow. So again, I think this nexus between security and development is a great thing for SID to address. Last thing I'll say to set the stage for John and Steve is that we can see an example of the questions about this in Kandahar. Kandahar, as you know, we've been preparing, and General McChrystal's been talking about that is the next big effort. And for a while there, many people thought this was going to be the next big military effort, similar to what went on in Marja, where in Marja, military went in, cleared out the place, they thought, and set the stage for governance, for development, for the government of Afghanistan to send in a district chief and security people, police, justice, courts, these kind of things. In Kandahar, it's going to be different, General McChrystal tells us now. It's going to be different in that we're not going to see this big military sweep in there to provide security to get rid of all the Taliban. It is more going to be the development stuff first, the governance first. The military will be a lower profile on the outskirts of Kandahar. So again, which is first? Do you need the governance first in order to win the people's support and so that they start reporting the Taliban and and providing support to the government, or do you need the military, the security, the active, the kinetic, as they say, military in to get rid of them, as they did in March? So these, I think, are some of the topics we want to talk about today. And as Betsy's already indicated, we have a great pair of panelists. Ambassador John Herbst, who will speak first, is the coordinator for reconstruction and stabilization at the State Department. Is right at the connection of this, what we're talking about here today, of the security of the civilian, military-civilian working together. So John's comments will be greatly appreciated by everyone in this room, I'm sure. As you have already been told, the bio is right here. I won't go through all. I'll just say that I follow John wherever he goes. He was our ambassador in Ukraine, and I followed him right there. So, however, I'm not going where he's going, where he is now. He's doing a great job on it. And then we'll be followed by Steve, and we'll get this name right, Killalay. He told me how to, is this close? Okay, thank you, Steve. All right, Steve Killalay, who is the author of this other handout, which you probably got, of the Global Peace Index. Also is the founder of the charitable foundation.
TCF and
TCF.
the Institute for Economics and Peace.
And that institute, exactly. So Steve will follow John, and let me ask John to come here. After both John and Steve speak, we will be sitting here. We'll have an opportunity for some questions for me, and then if I haven't understood something that they've said, I will ask questions about that, and then we'll open it to the audience and look forward to that discussion. So, John.
Thank you, Bill. Bill did such a good job framing the subject that I'm going to change my remarks a little bit to reflect that. Our office is a relatively new office. It's 6 years old. And we were stood up in the summer of 2004 because it was recognized by the fall of 2003 that the way we were doing the civilian side of our operation in Iraq was highly inadequate. So in a sense, the origins of the office come from the particularities of our engagement in Iraq and to a lesser extent in Afghanistan. How the United States was going to organize for what you'd call a stabilization mission, or what Bill, to quote David Kilcullen, refers to as a mission of opposed development. But point of fact, the office that we are now developing and the capacity that we are now developing is meant to do a variety of things beyond what's called stabilization missions or opposed development. And let me give you a different optic for looking at this. We live in a world characterized by extraordinary global interconnectedness, whether you're talking about communications, whether you're talking about transportation, whether you're talking about economic life. So people in relatively isolated areas in Africa, where they have wonderful cell phones, know instantaneously what happens in New York or what happens in Beijing. But as we live in a world of this extraordinary interconnectedness, we also live in a world of centrifugal political forces. Whether those political forces are in Europe, as what was portrayed as the inevitable march of the EU has been slowed down and even partly reversed, whether we're talking about the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the creation of 16 countries, or the former Yugoslavia, the creation of how many, 7 countries, or whether we talk about the emergence in different pockets of the world of ungoverned spaces. And this world, which on the one hand has this extraordinary interconnectedness, and on the other hand has this political dissolution, leads to some very interesting and dangerous phenomena. It used to be that an ungoverned space was only a problem if it was in your neighborhood. But given the connections of technology, now an ungoverned space is half a world away, can represent a danger or national security threat to your country. I mean, we learned that spectacularly on 9/11, where the failed state of Afghanistan harbored terrorists who were able to conduct a substantial blow to the United States. But it's not just terrorism that presents a problem. It's trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, ungoverned spaces in South America, ungoverned spaces closer to the United States become transportation hubs, putting drugs into our cities. Or ungoverned spaces in the Balkans become a transit hub, putting drugs into Europe. And trafficking in people. And as we've learned, over the past 2+ years, piracy can be a problem coming from ungoverned spaces. And the biggest problem of all, of course, is the combination of terrorist groups and loose nukes, weapons of mass destruction. So the point is, we've got to pay attention to ungoverned spaces. And if you pay attention to ungoverned spaces, you need to have different capacities than if you're dealing with governed spaces. And here we come back to the nexus of military or of security and economics. To turn an ungoverned space into a governed space, you have to promote governmental capacity. If it's in a peaceful environment, you have what is simply called development. If it's in a non-peaceful environment, you could call it opposed development. You could call it stability operations. But the point is you have to have a capacity to both provide security and to promote development. And that's what the office that I'm running is supposed to do. We essentially have 3 functions. One, to organize the U.S. government across its various capacities to be able to conduct a comprehensive, well-integrated operation. 2, to make sure we have the civilians with the right skill sets, the right training, and the right equipment to be able to conduct such operations. And 3, the ability to reach out, not just in whole of government, to reach out internationally, to team up with other governments, and for that matter, to reach out into our own society, to reach out into international society, to team up with NGOs and other interested actors to address these problems. Now, I'll give you a very brief report card on how we're doing. On item number 1, coordinating the U.S. government, frankly, not so well. Because, well, we created something called the Interagency Management System for doing this, and we've in fact been able to use it, we've been able to exercise it extensively, and to use it in fragments in different crises in the real world, it has not been fully legitimated. And that's because when you have a crisis in the United States, different people of influence want to play a role. And sorting out how they play a role remains an ad hoc business right down to this moment. So there, I have to say we're not doing as well as we might. On developing a civilian surge capacity, there we're doing much better. We've created something called the Civilian Response Corps. It was formally announced 2 years ago in July, in fact, in July of '08. And it was announced right after we got our first budget from Congress in June of '08. There was a causal connection there. And we have since gotten additional budgets, and we are, as of last Friday, the numbers change every week, we have 1,037 people in the Civilian Response Corps. And these are people from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, of course, State Department and USAID, and Treasury, Commerce, and Justice. And they include people who have all the basic skills necessary to support basic government services. And we split this Civilian Response Corps up into 2 different groups. There's what we call the active component, and these are people whose full-time job it is to deploy to countries in crisis. We have, I think, 109 members of the active component, and we're building to 264, and we should have 264 by the end of the year. We're building to 1,000 standby members, the second component. And these are people in those same 8 agencies of the U.S. government. They have a full-time J job, which has little to do with this, but they are trained and ready to deploy in a larger operation. As of today, we have 60 people deployed around the world. That number will grow to over 100 by the end of the summer. And Afghanistan has about 40 of them, but by late summer we'll have at least 15 in Sudan. And in fact, we are helping the Special Envoy for Sudan, Scott Gration, organize and staff an operation to make sure that when South Sudan votes in a referendum next January on its status, should it remain part of Sudan, should it become an independent country, that we will have the civilians in place in the run-up to and after to make sure that whatever the result of that referendum, the outcome is peaceful, and what emerges in southern Sudan is a government which is able to perform its functions. So that's roughly what my office does and how it connects to the subject of the day. But I won't take much more time, just to point out that the connection between security and development in this world of ungoverned spaces is a connection which is going to last for some time. And we have to be able to work together, the different actors in not just the U.S. government, but the international community, not just the international state community, but international society, so that we can perform this task together. In fact, we've taken some serious steps in that direction. Before I took this job, in fact, Bill mentioned how he followed me in Ukraine. Well, I followed Carlos Pascual, who I also followed into the job I currently have. And Carlos, when he set up the office, did some very good work with the NGO community and the military, putting them together so that they could learn to work together in precisely these places. And with USIP, where Bill now works, it's really quite an incestuous brew of institutions and people. They created this handbook for civilians and the military to operate together in the field. And I'm sure many of you have seen it, maybe you've actually used it. It's a real contribution to this subject. But again, in this very messy world, and it's a messy world which will be with us, I would say, for the professional life of my children who are now entering the international security community. In this world, it is going to be impossible to do what's necessary unless both the security folks and the development folks have a modus operandi. And our office is really focusing on helping to provide that. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Excellent follow-on. And Steve, Kilale, the floor is yours.
Well, that was an excellent presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the tone somewhat, and I'm going to start to talk about peace, and then from peace we'll finally drill down into conflict. But if we think about the 21st century, and just following on from the prior speaker's comments, we're living in a world which is interconnected like in no other epoch in human history. Major challenges facing the world today are things like sustainability, such as climate change, ever-decreasing biodiversity, full use of fresh water on the planet, as well as unrulable states. And unless we have a world which is basically peaceful, we'll never actually get the levels of cooperation, trust, inclusiveness, let alone empower the international institutions to create the governance and the institutions to solve these issues. Therefore, I'd say peace is a prerequisite for the survival of society as we know it in the 21st century. And this actually is different than in any other epoch in human history. In the past, peace may have been the domain of the altruistic, but in this century, it's in everyone's self-interest. But having said that, what do we actually know about peace? If you went to any major university in the world today and you went into the literature departments, you won't find a course on the literature of peace. Yet, everyone in this room would know profound works on peace. Similarly, if you went into any of the economics departments in any major university in the world, you won't find a course on the economics of peace. Yet studies we've done with the UN Global Compact show that 80% of senior business executives believe their markets expand with peace, and 79% believe that their actual cost structures drop as you increase peacefulness. Now, my background's in business, and I've done really quite well out of it. Set up a private foundation. I've spent about 15 years engaged in developmental aid, and we're operational in countries like Burma, Laos, Cambodia, East Timor, Papua New Guinea, Rwanda, Congo, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Zimbabwe. So about 5 years ago, I'm wandering through the Congo and I started to wonder what the opposite of these really stressed out nations were like. What were the most peaceful nations in the world like And what could we learn from them? And I couldn't find anything which actually ranked the nations in the world by their peacefulness. So, back to what do we know about peace? A simple businessman like myself be wandering through Africa and wonder what the most peaceful nations in the world are, and it hasn't been done. Again, what do we know about peace? So that's how we launched the Global Peace Index. So it's the first study ever to rank the nations of the world by their peacefulness. And we used the absence of violence as the definition of peace, because that was measurable. But we also measure the internal peacefulness of a nation as well as the external peacefulness. Now, the absence of violence is fine for actually creating a rank, but doesn't tell you anything about what actually creates peace. So what we did then was we did a whole lot of statistical work, working on regression analysis, correlations, and a whole lot of other statistical methods to be able to see what actually correlated with peace and what were the structures and attitudes which actually created peaceful societies. And none of it actually turned out to be rocket scientists. Most of it was stuff we all would know. So if we look at peaceful societies, they really are quite often very, very resilient. So we look at Iceland. It suffered the worst of the Western nations in the global financial crisis, yet it's bounced back quite well, and that's the resilience which peace creates within a society. It's much better ability to be able to bounce back from problems. So we start to look at what you actually need to create a peaceful society. There are three core things, backed up by about half a dozen others. But the three core things are well-functioning government, strong economies, and an equitable distribution of resources within those societies. Now, feeding into them in many different ways is things like free flow of information, and that can be best epitomised in the West by a free press, low levels of corruption, high participation rates in primary and secondary education, and a number of other things as well. So now, we really want to create an environment where we don't have failed states. It's very, very hard to go in and pick up the mess, as we can see in Afghanistan, because we've been in there 10 years now. And though there are some glimmers of hope at the moment, we're a long, long way from actually having really achieved success. So if you can get into states before they actually fall apart and start to build the right structures through your ODAs, then you're in a position to actually create an environment where the failed states won't actually occur. And it's much, much more expensive to go in and try and sort out the mess afterwards than put in the proactive actions needed to prevent it in the first place. Now, I know we're short on time. I could talk for an hour, and I've been told I only had 10 minutes. So at this point, I'll probably stop. You've got a feel for the work we're doing, and I'll pass it back to the chair.
Steve, thank you very much. Excellent. Well, let me just begin then, and I'm hoping that that you here will be interested to pick up this questions for John and Steve. But on this last point, Steve, I was interested in your point about prevention. That is, it's if one can prevent a conflict or a failed state, as you said, it is cheaper in all kinds of resources, including human life, including economic resources, than if it fails, we have to go in and pick up the pieces as we're doing. John, you spoke a lot about the office. Your office has some interest in prevention as well, as I understand it. Can you want to talk a little bit about that? And then, Steve, you can elaborate on this prevention question.
I think that Steve framed it exactly the right way, which is that prevention is much smarter than doing stability operations. So if you can see the problem before, you should try and get in, because that's when you can have the most impact for the lowest cost. And in fact, our office, while it was established as a result of the Iraq operation and its inadequacies, they quickly understood the importance of conflict prevention, and they pioneered the development of the type of indices which are now relatively common.
So getting more operational then. I mean, prevention, we can all agree, good idea. However, it's hard. To try to prevent conflict around the world, you have to kind of identify problems that would be coming early, There are a lot of countries around the world. There are limited resources. Even in SCRS, there are limited resources.
Especially in SCRS.
Especially in SCRS. So how does one do prevention? I mean, what does prevention mean operationally? Steve, why don't you start, and then John will.
Well, I wouldn't actually say I'm an expert in this area, but I'm always willing to make a comment or two. So what we're really doing is research, coming up with the research, and there's a lot of other people who are much better experts on the operational aspects of this. But the further you move up the peace chain, the less the intervention you have to build in to actually create peace or improve peace. That'd be the first thing. The second thing, there's an interconnection with the economy. So we've done a fair amount of research now and looking on what was the cost of violence to the global economy. So I've had some economists looking at that. So over the last 4 years, in the time we've been doing the Global Peace Index, there's $28 trillion been the amount of money lost. So that comes out about $7 trillion annually. Obviously, we'll never get a world which is totally peaceful. But if you could just improve the peacefulness of the world by 25%, that picks up $1.75 trillion a year. So if you can actually invest in maybe the more developed economies, you can actually pick money up from there, and the money you've got from there you can now use to fuel through ODAs into the less developed regions and start cascading down. Certainly if you're going to move into India at the moment, or Pakistan, which aren't failed states but have got serious levels of violence, it's really expensive and very, very difficult. But it may be if you move out into other areas of the Middle East and surrounding countries and actually work at improving the governance there, you won't actually get the spillover effects.
So, John, there's the economic aspect, the developmental aspect, if you will, of prevention, which this audience is well versed in on the developmental side. How do you think about actually doing prevention?
All right. Let me break down your question into different pieces. One, there's actually a substantial literature on the factors which go into creating failed and failing states. And there's some statistics show that countries which reach a certain level of income, I think it's $6,000 a year in per capita income, have generally speaking passed the hump of becoming a failed state or a country that's going to fall apart. So there's an economic development component. That's point one. Point two, you have various indices leveling instability around the world, categorizing instability around the world, and they come up with anywhere from 35 to 50 countries in the failed or failing state category. Point is, that's far more countries that the United States can address, or perhaps even the international community can address. So individual countries will make determinations as to when their interests are at stake that they need to engage in a specific country. Third point, which may be actually directly answering your question, how you conduct conflict prevention. This is an art, it's not a science. Every case is different. You need to have people who understand the country in question, as well as people who understand conflict prevention. And they need to tailor a specific program for a specific country. You need to be able to put people on the ground who can, again, combine country expertise with specific functional expertise, who could put that program together. And you need to make sure you've got the resources to do it, because this is very, very difficult work.
Steve, let me shift with both of you, but start with you, Steve. The connection that we were talking about at the outset, that is the stability, the security of a country, and the development work that goes on there. And sometimes the security work goes on at the same time as development. Sometimes security work precedes it and allows it to go forward. In your studies of the Global Peace Index and other focus on peace, what do you see? How do you see that connection between security and development?
Complicated. I think, I think stabilisation, it's an incredibly complicated process, and I think just to come up a little bit, if we look over the last 4 years, the 20 most peaceful countries in the world have actually, the potential for terrorist acts actually decreased, as it has in the US. However, we go to the bottom 20 countries and the potential for terrorist attacks has actually increased, and this is countries like Pakistan and India. So although we might be protecting ourselves at the top end, at the bottom end we may actually be creating more problems further on. So it is very, very complex. As we look at the structures of peace, what we find, there isn't actually a causal relationship. A lot of the time they flow both ways. Many different things are interconnected. So let's take a war zone. You're never going to get any economic development there until you actually get a solution to the conflict. You actually, get a settlement. Now, at that point, you get economic development take off, and then the economic development will actually feed the peace process. Similarly, you get further down along in societies and you'll find actually the opposite will happen. So if you look at the global financial crisis over the last 2 years, the world has actually become less peaceful. And that's on the back of some economic downturn. So it really depends on the situation. Now, if you look at the investment cycle for businesses, for example, so if you're looking in a post-conflict zone, as you improve the stability, different types of businesses have become more viable, and there's a return on investment. So, like, I guess the classic examples, if you go to the Congo at the wrong time, you wouldn't have even been able to plant a crop because you wouldn't have been there to harvest it, because as soon as it grew, the rebels would be in, they'd take it for their armies, and on you'd go. So you get a bit of peacefulness, you can actually grow a crop. That's about a 3-month timeline. So if you can improve the peacefulness, you've got different industries which you need to focus on at different stages of peace to actually bring it on. So you've got 12, 18 months time frame. There are different sort of things you can do. You get a 5-year time frame. Now you've got 5 years you can plan for return on investment and so on.
John, Steve says a moment ago, no development until there's a settlement. What's your sense of this? Can there be no development? How does this work?
It is very hard for there to be development when there's major conflict. It's really as simple as that. I mean, we're seeing it in Afghanistan. You see it in the DRC. You obviously see it in Somalia. I think that's just a fact of life. You can have some development in a country in conflict where you have zones of peace. I mean, you had the concept in Vietnam of strategic hamlets, and you had Accords program, which was partly successful. To other reasons, the operation in Vietnam proved to be a failure. But even that is the exception that proves the rule, because in fact, in specific areas, you do have enough stability to accommodate economic development. But it's not a surprise that in places like Afghanistan, the Taliban have targeted AID workers or foreign business folks because A, they were soft targets, and B, hitting them meant that ultimately their enemy, our side, would not win.
I'm going to ask John and Steve one last question, but this will be my last, unless there's no questions from the audience, which I'm assured there will be plenty. Betsy tells me that people are irritated when you don't get enough time to ask your questions. So now I understand, Stacy, that people should come to this mic. Is that right? 2 mics. Ah, there you go. Okay, so let me do one last question. And while I'm doing this, people are invited to come to one of the other of the 2 mics, and we will go to the audience. So. I mentioned Kandahar at the beginning. One of the questions, one of the debates, one of the controversies in Kandahar has to do with providing energy, electricity in particular. And Steve just talked about the timeframes on development, short-term versus long-term. The short-term solution or proposal for providing electricity to the people of Kandahar is to bring in generators and provide diesel fuel to run those generators and that would get you some electricity to the downtown for economic development and the people's well-being quickly. The alternative is a longer term. There is a dam. The Kajaki Dam is, many people here have probably heard of this. It's now famous to the north of Kandahar. It's up in the mountains. It's not, to drive from Kandahar up to Kajaki, to where the dam is dangerous. So USAID, as John just indicated, runs the risk of when they drive up there, and it's a big risk when they try to get equipment up there. And some of the equipment needed to repair the Kajaki Dam is big and heavy. The turbines, I think it's GE, I think some American manufacturer has provided these turbines many, many years ago. And so now we're trying to replace them, so to renovate, provide electricity to the people of Kandahar as well as the region takes longer. There is this question of short term, which if you provide electricity soon, the people of Kandahar will be more appreciative. The argument is, the hope is, the theory is, and they will begin to come over to the side of the government, and a virtuous cycle begins. On the other hand, buying generators and trucking in diesel fuel to run them is not sustainable. So the development experts in the room bristle at this short-term solution. Let me get both of your thoughts on this, and then we have people already lined up to ask even better questions. John.
This is the classic dilemma. Are you going to make sure that the local population has what it needs, or are you going to make sure that the local governing authorities develop in the best way possible? And like anything else in this area, there's no stock answer. On the one hand, you may need to provide certain things immediately to the local population to ensure that they don't go over to the dark side. On the other hand, that's not a sustainable strategy, because unless the local authorities are able to do these things, you're going to be there forever. Yeah. So it's going to be a mix. Simple as that. Yep. Or as complicated as that.
Complicated as that. Steve?
Again, I haven't visited Afghanistan, so but I will make my comments. So I think big dams, big benefits, big risk. So it's all or nothing. There are other ways of being able to stimulate electricity demand, and it may be more expensive per kilowatt, but you can actually spread it. Could be through solar panels, could be through small diesel generators, it could be through pedal operated generators, a whole range of little things. Now, through engaging in them, you may not get the electricity to be able to set up a steel plant, but you'll get enough electricity to be able to set up a bakery, which does stimulate demand, and it also spreads the risk. So it gives you a lot more opportunity for success rather than one big hit.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. John. Sir, now if you will introduce yourselves and...
let's make certain this is on.
Let's be sure it's on.
It's on, okay. I'm Chip House from the Alliance for Peace Building, and this question may be more for you, Ambassador Bill.
This is not fair. This is not part of the rules.
But it's actually appropriate for all of you, because it goes back to prevention issues. You're perhaps most appropriate because I just spent two of the last 3 weeks in Macedonia, and two of the leading academic experts on Macedonia are at West Point, your alma mater. And what's interesting about West Point and prevention, and Macedonia and prevention, that we've really not talked about with the Global Peace Index project much, is why do places that should blow up not blow up? You know, at the Alliance, we've looked at Guinea-Bissau.
That's a good question. Yeah.
And I think if we're going to get to a point where we can have a skill set where countries don't blow up that could blow up, we need all the skills that are in suits at the front of the table, plus us, and especially the military, because you guys have your former guys have the lift and the resources to make it happen. And you know, I've spent the last decade working on this, and I don't have an answer.
John, Steve, why don't you, I will have something to say, but Steve, go ahead.
Look, I think, Chip, you've touched on a really brilliant point, and that comes back to peace and how little we understand about peace. And the study of peace isn't the inverse of studying conflict, and I'm just going to give two quick examples, and then just make one final comment. So, like, if we go back with medicine, go back to the 50s, made great breakthroughs in pathology. Heart disease is almost a thing of the past. We're really getting on top of cancer. It's great. But it wasn't until we got to the 80s, till we started to study people who were really healthy, did we realise what it took to stay healthy, like right exercise, right mental disposition, good diet. Now, similarly, if you wanted to have a really great marriage, would you go and hang around the divorce courts to learn out how? So, through the study of the positive aspects of something, and this comes back to just the study of positive psychology, if you like, if you study the positive aspects of things, you actually get expansionary. Whereas if you're actually studying the conflict or what's wrong, you're really just about trying to stop the symptoms or trying to fix the problem. So I think your point's an excellent one, and I'm back to we don't actually know enough about peace. And if you can't, and so like we've got a fact-based approach to solving peace, but if you can't measure something, how do you know whether the actions you're taking are actually helping or hindering you in trying to achieve your goals?
John.
I would agree with both Chip and Steve said. We have some ideas of what's needed, but we don't know enough. We have some capacity to deal with this problem, but we don't have enough. So we need to work in both areas.
On this last point about capacities, we clearly don't have enough. But Chip, you also pointed out that the military does have a lot of capacity. Again, John and I both mentioned Dave Kilcullen and his opposed development notion. But another point he makes is that in most developed countries, the ratio of the number of people in the military compared to the number of people in the Foreign Ministry and Development Agency, that is, the Defense Department in the U.S. country, Defense Department compared to USAID and state together. The ratio of that in most countries is about 8 to 10 to 1. Okay? In the United States, it's 350 to 1. Okay? So our military capabilities are very large. Now, this is, I see some looks of horror in the room. It's good and bad. I mean, it's bad for reasons that are reflected on your faces. But it is good if we can take John's point, and I think maybe what Chip was hinting at was if we can take advantage of the resources in the military to provide transportation, communication, life support, food to civilians that are in these difficult places trying to do development, or even take another step and take a look at the military. There are battalions, brigades even, in the U.S. military reserves who do civil affairs. Now, civil affairs sounds like something related to development, and in fact it is in a lot of cases. There are people in the military who have been police chiefs and police officers around the country. There are people in the military who have been mayors. There are people in the military who know something about water treatment plants. Now, they're not experts, and right now they're not trained to do this, and the training you get from people in the State Department, USAID, and NGOs who do it well. But the question is, can the state aid NGO communities lead and use the military resources, 350 to 1, to be able to get more done? I mean, the capabilities question is a serious one. John, you look like you're about to say something, which you were welcome to do.
It's certainly true that given the disparity in resources, it would be useful to be able to call upon the military capacity. But the better solution, which may be a little bit utopian, but not quite, is to develop some of these capacities on the civilian side.
Clearly.
And in fact, that's what we're trying to do with the Civilian Response Corps. This Corps has an expeditionary capacity to put people on the ground in difficult places where civilians normally do not go. We provide our own security, our own transportation, our own logistics, our own places to live. And this is something which is going to develop, and it's going to be proved to be an indispensable tool.
Good. Good. Please.
Eduardo Abreu, actually a consultant most recently with USIP. Nice to see the ambassadors again.
See you, Eduardo.
Actually, I have a question, which actually first to Steve and then to the ambassador. Steve, I noticed that actually on this map here of the least peaceful countries, there's a correlation between, I see, those who are the most populous and also, I would say, the most stressed in their natural resources, either for political or for natural environmental reasons. I'm curious as to whether that was a factor in your ranking, and to the ambassador, whether security of natural resources where does that fall in terms of a security and development nexus when, for example, Afghanistan next?
Good question, Eduardo. Steve.
No, what we do is we use the absence of violence as the measure of peace. So the size of the country or whether they've got natural resources or not doesn't matter. Now, there certainly does seem to be a relationship. And if we look at the really large populous states, I think it's just a lot harder to hold them together. You've got a lot more internal friction. So the most peaceful nations tend to be medium-sized nations. 15 of the 20 of them are in Western and Eastern Europe. And if we look at the evolution of Europe since the Second World War, they've put a lot of emphasis on being able to share a whole lot of different aspects so they wouldn't go back to war. So the EU wasn't ever about economics, it was about creating peace, because they really didn't want to repeat the First and Second World War. But if we look at the study of peace, I'll invert the question on resources. So now, we all know that there's a relationship between conflict and resources. But there are some countries which are stunningly successful on the back of resources. All you've got to do is look just one country north of here, Canada, Australia, Norway. So what can we learn from the countries which have actually been able to successfully manage their resources, and the nations have actually been developed on the back of the resources to understand how to do it correctly, rather than, again, look into the failed states?
The connection between the security of natural resources and overall development. One, in a country which has substantial natural resources, the ability of the government to control it suggests the government has some capacity and gives it a capacity to work. But two, if those resources are only run for the benefit of the few individuals associated with the government, you can have a major problem. The solution, where you're able to do it, is to establish government control and establish a mechanism which ensures that those resources are for the good of the country. But that's not a very common occurrence. Tom Friedman talks about the problems of the oil-rich countries. The DRC is, in terms of mineral wealth, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, yet you don't have an ability to exercise effective control over it.
And we hope Afghanistan will learn from the DRC and be more like Chile and less like DRC.
We certainly hope so.
With its trillions of dollars. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. My name is Rosemary Garcia, and I'm with Nathan Associates. I have several questions for Steve, but I'll make it just one. I've been working with global data sets a great deal, and the largest constraint we have is the quality of the data and the availability of data. Yeah. And some of the data that we work on is internationally, from international sources, and they're actually 2 years old and 3 years old. How do you deal with that in order to keep your index as current as possible?
Look, that's really excellent question. So when you're dealing with any global set of data, we're at 149 countries now, we rely on some data from other groups as well. And you're right, some of it can be up to 2 years old. But you can only work with what you've got, and nothing we actually measure do we actually have what we call accurate statistics. So I think what's important is we take the data and we work as best we can with what we've got. So what I'd say for the Global Peace Index is we start to look at what it correlates with. We start to get an idea of the rigour of the methodology we've got. So what we did is we got a panel of international experts on statistics and peace to actually work out what stats we should get, what weighing we should have for those stats, and then we hired the Economist Intelligence Unit, which is probably the world's preeminent group on producing indexes. And they've got about 100 people they actually get involved in any one year in actually producing the underlying stats for the index. So, and that's about as good as we can do.
Okay. My second question is for the entire panel. We tend to deal with fragile states in case-by-case basis. So whenever something happens in a country, then we determine what policy we're going to follow. Would you be in favor of developing a strategy for all fragile states? There seems to be something that we can help, so that way countries don't keep on repeating back into conflict cycles. So that's my question.
John, this sounds like an SCRS question.
One, there is a great deal of academic work being done on this, and I would welcome more to be done. Two, I'm not sure that's so much a function for our office, but I can see parts of the government, different elements of the government might want to do that. But three, we'd be very interested in trying to apply such lessons learned. And in fact, we do have a lessons learned capacity to at least to develop approaches for individual missions. But last point, there are commonalities, and we want to seek those out, but there are also real particularities. You know, I think Tolstoy said every family that's happy is happy in the same way, but every family that's miserable is miserable in a different way. And I think there's something to that, at least as regards failed states.
Thank you.
Let me do one quick thing. Because that question on organization, and indeed if there is a template or some organizing principles, has come up in the Quadrennial Development and Diplomacy Review, QDDR. John, I know you've participated in this, and I suspect there are some people in here who have participated and are interested in it. Has this issue come up? I mean, the question does come up if an organization like yours, who has expertise in these topics that we're talking about here today, and applies those skills and resources to specific countries, getting to Rosemary's question, is the QDDR going to deal with that issue?
The QDDR is paying a lot of attention to the subject of this conversation today. The Obama administration feels strongly that the ability to operate in ungoverned spaces is a critical one. They would like to be able to deal with this problem on the front end, meaning via conflict prevention, but they want to have an expeditionary capacity to deal with it in all of its manifestations. And I think the QDDR will offer some recommendations on this.
Very good, very good. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Bridget Moix with the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We're a Quaker lobby in the public interest here. Thank you very much for the discussion. It's very interesting. I can't help but take up Steve's invitation from the beginning to be a voice of dissent and say that we think the intersection and increasing connections between military and development work and missions is actually quite dangerous. And we think it's dangerous for development, and we think it's dangerous for a peaceful world, and we think it's bad for U.S. national security as well. And I was interested when I received the invitation to the event that the title actually, at least on the email I saw, was the Diplomacy Development Nexus. So somewhere there was a change in the title, because I got here and this says Security Development, and I'm interested in both, so it's fine. But I was thinking about the experience of Quakers in doing peace-building work and development around the world. And what we found is that sort of surrounding yourself with guns or military force doesn't build better relations or do good development, and often backfires. And what does, and what many development organizations and groups have found, is that building relationships, good relationships with communities, is actually the best path to security and the best way of sort of helping strengthen resilience in societies. And so that brought me back to diplomacy, and I wanted to ask about the role of diplomacy, both within the work that the CRC is doing, what's the role of diplomacy there? And also, Steve, if you have comments in that in terms of the work you've done on the Global Peace Index.
I knew you were out there, Bridget. I knew there would be a pushback on this business. I'm not disappointed. Thank you, thank you. John.
Certainly, diplomacy is one important skill in the civilian response corps that we are developing. The basic idea is that we want to be able to put teams into any crisis, teams which have the regional expertise which you normally associate with diplomats, the political expertise you also normally associate with diplomats, with the functional expertise of engineers and lawyers and doctors and administrators and so on. So that's the concept. I would neither, and this is not because I am a wishy-washy diplomat, but I would neither agree nor disagree with your dissent. Put another way, there are cases where I think you're absolutely right, where the best work could be done, where the guns and the uniforms are far away. But then there are other places where without those guns and uniforms, you're not going to be able to operate. So again, it all depends upon the circumstances and the operation that you're in.
That's right. There are opposed development environments and there are unopposed development environments. And we want to try to figure out where how the U.S. government is organized to handle both, but recognizing the tensions that you bring up, Bridget. Steve.
Look, I think you've got some very, very good points there, but I think we need a little bit of situational intelligence around various situations. So, the military doing development work in Kandahar, it's a tough ask because there's obviously a lot of issues with the local population about sort of invading countries and armed forces. But other parts of the world, the US military is really well liked. And imagine Haiti, for example, they'd be welcomed in there with open arms to provide security in the current situation. So I'm a bit like John. I've spent a lot of time on projects we've done in a conflict area. So one in the centre of my mind at the moment, as I'm talking here, was northern Uganda about 7 or 8 years ago when the LRA was active. And having the military there, it really gave comfort to be able to actually just do really simple things like rehabilitation of child soldiers. Yeah.
Sure, Bridget, go ahead. You may want to do a mic, just so people can hear you on the mic. Yeah.
One of the distinctions there that I think you're both pointing out is that there's a big difference in a situation where the U.S. is engaged in a war-making military mission and where it's not. And so I think much more look at that difference between, and how to manage that difference, I think would be useful.
Very good. Good. Thank you. Sir.
My name is Irving Rosenthal. I'm a professor at American University. The answer to the last question was when you leave development to the military, such as in Vietnam, we fail. And there's no question about it. But that was not my point. My question was to Ambassador Herbst. How do you explain, indeed, justify the creation of SCRS in State Department rather than in AID? The aid mission, long-term mission, is to create long-term development so that conflicts never occur. AID has an Office of Conflict Mitigation and Management. AID has an Office of Military Affairs. AID has put out many policy statements. To the last questioner, there is already an aid policy statement on fail-state strategy. AID already has a policy statement on trafficking in people and development. AID has offices of development and governance with long experience to carry out those kinds of activities all around the world. AID has an office specifically established to work with the NGOs and PVO communities around the world. AID has the contracting staff to hire, manage, and organize all of these special groups that you talk about. AID has the doctors, engineers, and lawyers to carry out the functions that your office seems to be looking for. AID already has contract relationships with almost every U.S. government, USDA, Department of Justice, to carry out programs in coordination with these agencies. AID already has an office concerned with police development, and I can go on and on and on. So I really don't understand why SCRS has gotten 5, 6, 7 times the amount of funding than, for example, the Office of Conflict Mitigation and Management. Thank you.
The answer is pretty clear. And it goes back to what I said the function of SCRS is. SCRS's function is, one, to organize the entire U.S. government for these sorts of operations. These operations are inherently political, and they are not restricted just to the activities of USAID, which are extensive, and you've identified many of them. So you want to be able to draw upon the capacities of the entire U.S. government, not just of one agency. And if you might say the operation in Iraq was tried without this whole-of-government approach, and it failed. It failed substantially. I think that you're right that the AID that once existed, say in the late 60s and early 70s, would have been able to carry out the mission that SCRS has been asked to do. But AID has been hollowed out consistently since the 60s, since, the mid-70s. As a result of the Vietnam War, the aftermath, the CIA, the Defense Department, and USAID all took substantial hits. But then when Reagan was elected president, the CIA and the Defense Department got substantial increments, and AID continued to be hollowed out. So AID has not had the capacity to undertake the type of major mission which SCRS has now been asked to do. And so, one, the AID has been hollowed out. Two, this mission is whole of government, not just AID. Three, AID is asked under the system we have put together to carry out the functions, all of which you mentioned, which it is able to carry out. But four, we handle the policy connection, the coordination across the U.S. government, and the international side. There's your answer.
Good answer. Thank you, John. Sir. Yeah, Irving, you have follow-up? Okay. Thank you. See you.
Hi, my name's BJ Bloom. I'm with Blue Law International, but I'm also a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Virginia. And I wanted to actually present a critique to Mr. Colella for the Global Peace Index and a related question for Mr. Herbst. As one other questioner pointed out, there are some correlations that you can see just looking at the map, and one of them also has to do with multi-ethnic societies. And I say this as a political economist and a statistician that you risk the possibility of actually propagating cultural stereotypes by, if that index doesn't change much over time, there's not much of a leap for some people to make between saying, the difference between saying Iceland itself is peaceful versus the Icelandic people as a characteristic of their culture are a peaceful people, whereas Rwanda, instead of saying Rwanda is not peaceful, it's saying there's some sort of essential characteristic of the Rwandans themselves that make them not peaceful. So I'm just saying that, you know, I recognize that this has a lot to do with the statistics that you find and the relationships between economic development and peace and democracy. But there's also a warning that it could be, because it also overlaps with multi-ethnic and multicultural societies where there are ethnic conflicts that are driving the peace index, that you might have that problem. And also the question for Mr. Herbst is, are there lessons of countries that the State Department has seen successful peace operations in, say, periods of time in Bosnia and Lebanon? Are there lessons we can learn from those kinds of operations when it comes to stability operations?
Good questions. Thanks, BJ. Steve.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. first thing is there is movement within the index. So what we've done is created an index which is fairly sensitive, so we do get quite a bit of movement up and down. So some countries have moved up or down 15 places. You don't get it at the top or the bottom, but the mid-ranking countries do. And certainly the lead table, the top 10, there's regular changes in that every year. Bottom's not changing as much, which is quite surprising. But back to the positive aspects of peace, okay? And again, certainly we can find plenty of examples of ethnicity creating conflict, but let's look at the other end, and we'll go right to the top and we'll go to New Zealand. Okay, so New Zealand's got a very large Maori population, incredibly ferocious and warlike background, yet they've been able to maintain the cultural diversity and actually even rise to be the most peaceful nation in the world. So it's back to studying the positive to understand why and how do we now bring that down the lead table to reinforce all the way down. And we don't do enough on it. We don't do enough on it. I know some of the stuff about New Zealand because it's next door, but I'll bet it's not being taught in any of the political science degrees, but you're getting taught a lot about the conflict through diversity, rather than the success stories of diversity. And there's a lot of them. There are a lot of them.
And your next question was on success stories. John.
Aside from, you might say, peace operations where there was essentially a political conflict among competent contending groups or nations, there are not many positive examples of peace operations. And I'm not sure, well, I think you could make the claim that there is one you mentioned, Bosnia, is one where the United States was involved and it was successful. But that fits into that category I just described, where ultimately you had competent competing groups willing to make a deal and then to impose it, to carry it out, implement it. If you look at countries where they've fallen apart or where there's been an insurgency, there are very few successful examples. I think the one clear success was a British success in Malaya in the 40s and the late 50s. I think you could say another example of a society which seems to have reached this point, we could say we've gotten there, is Sierra Leone. And there too, another British operation. Although the resources put into Sierra Leone, given the size of the country, have been extraordinary. And whether it's ultimately sustainable is a question mark. And another example of similar kinds is Kosovo. Although Kosovo, we're not as far along on the path to success as we are in Sierra Leone. But the thing to keep in mind is these things are inherently really hard. And therefore, you should only engage when you decide your interests are truly at stake. Because otherwise, you don't want to be associated with failure, and expensive failure, too.
Good. Sir.
Thank you. John Wetzel, PricewaterhouseCoopers. One thing that we saw in Iraq was this concept of your zone of peace with Kurdistan. And it was really remarkable, the difference of development that you had there. But also you had little international military presence. And you had this homegrown Peshmergan force that kept the security there very well. Is that part of the arsenal or the toolbox for your organization for future conflicts? And would be more interested in figuring out how that was actually going to work.
I'm not sure I would say it's part of the toolbox because I don't think we could use the Peshmerga all over the world. But I mean, the point is this: when you have a society which has a certain stability for whatever reason, when you have a society which produces local authorities who have legitimacy and competence, you have almost solved your problem. So the reason why you didn't need soldiers in Kyrgyzstan is because the Peshmerga did it.
Kurdistan.
But Kurdistan, right. Just shows you what's on my mind. And again, it's the problem is how do you help a country develop that sort of competence when it doesn't have it, or when it's racked by conflict, which prevents the emergence of that level of competence.
And the follow-up to that would be, is that one thing that the U.S. government has focused on the future, that if there is going to be another multi-ethnic conflict area, that if there are natural divisions and potentials to develop a Kurdistan-like area, is that going to be part of what our diplomacy and development is?
Any time we decide to go into a country in a major way, decisions will be taken at the highest levels of our government. And so I can't say precisely what those decisions will be because I'm not at the highest level of our government. I can tell you the way we look at it in our office, any operation to have a chance of success has to be based on a close analysis of the local circumstances. And that close analysis must include a sharp-eyed understanding of divisions within the society, different factors that are at play. And to be successful, we have to take full advantage of those factors. And any operation I'd be involved in would certainly make that a key element.
Thank you, John. Sir.
Hi, my name is Michael Davidson. I'm with Asia Policy Point, where I think tank studies East Asia issues. I had a question for Ambassador Herbst. You mentioned earlier functional groupings and how that might play a role in conflict prevention. And I wanted to take you back to the QDR, single D for defense, and how it mentioned conflict might arise from climate change instabilities and how that might exacerbate existing institutional deficiencies and the like. And I wanted to get your opinion on, first, if your office is doing anything specifically related to the potential effects of climate change, and if that might show up in the QDDR.
Our office is not doing any research related to the impact of climate change on this subject, on stability or instability. We recognize that as one potential mega factor that will have an impact. There is research being done outside, and we will certainly take full advantage of it.
John, just on this point, and then we'll go here for the question. The national security strategy, recently promulgated by the Obama administration, does get at a much broader range of issues, including climate change, but economic development and even macroeconomic health in this country and other. How, if at all, does the stabilization, reconstruction, development work figure into the national security strategy?
Well, certainly the national security strategy lays out the overall approach of the administration of the president. And the NSS has put a great emphasis on developing civilian expeditionary capacity. So we represent that, and we're working on it.
Very good. Please, Steve.
On climate change, well, I thought I might just relate a couple of experiences on water. So we've got climate change, and that may hit us 10, 20, 40 years out, seriously. But as economic growth grows, particularly in the Asian region, the amount of water consumed far outstrips the economic growth. So I just had some people who work for me, they were up in Laos 4 weeks ago. And the Mekong, the Chinese have put 3 dams in the Mekong now, and you can actually walk, and they were there just as the dry season broke. You could actually walk at some parts of the Mekong across from Laos into Thailand. And like, if I don't know if anyone here has ever seen the Mekong, it's about 2 kilometres across. Like, this is just stunning stuff. There's 2 more dams going up in China. Laos are also looking at putting a couple of dams. On the lower part of the Mekong, you get 70 million people whose lives are dependent on it. As you put the dams in, the water now doesn't go to your actual small farmers, it goes to the factory farms. So you're now actually going to have a displacement of people as well. If we look at the Nile, we've already seen conflict on the Nile over water, but there's plans again to put more dams down there. The Brahmachari River, which runs, one of the major sources in India, runs out of India into China and then back into India. It's getting dammed in China currently. So this isn't a China bash story because they've got about 22% of the world's population and 6% of the water. But water, it's going to be seriously short, and that's just getting fueled by economic growth.
Sir.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Anlian. I'm with Technologists, Inc., and Technologists, Inc. is the largest U.S. company operating in Afghanistan with over 1,000 trained professionals. So we're right on the X of the nexus that you're discussing, and we support the movement. My question, though, is to the ambassadors.
Which movement do you support? Okay.
The collective movement you're articulating there today,
very good.
Which is the theme of the program here, the security development nexus. I think it's really the right way to go, and our primary client is the Army Corps of Engineers, and we're doing wonderful things. If you pick up Freedom Builder magazine this month, you'll see our featured article on the front page. But my question is, what are the ambassador's reaction to the rating of the United States on Steve Kalila's index? It's midpoint and the bottom half. And this is less a political statement, but more one about the compilation of data. So what's your response to where your country is on this rating?
Well, first of all, Steve, you want to talk about the rating, and then Steve, then John can say what our view is of this.
Yeah, well, it's always how can I put it, creates great debate. The rankings of any country within any... We did the launch of the 2010 Global Peace Index, and I must have done 50 media interviews, so I've done a lot of them. But the most interesting one was New Zealand. I did a couple of national radio shows there. They had a panel of journalists who kept on complaining about they shouldn't be number one. They couldn't see why their nation were number one. But it says something about New Zealand, like how many people refuse a gong. But if we come back and we look at the index, it's a composite of 23 indicators, and quite often I look at countries and think, well, gee, it shouldn't be there. And each time I dig into the detail, I generally get swung around and realise I'm wrong. So we've got a 60% weighing towards the internal piece, 40% weighing towards external piece. So now if the US had an external ranking the same as Western European nations, it'd still be 53rd. And the reason for that is you've got the largest jail population in the world. You've got, by Western standards, a very high rate of crime. You've got a very high rate of guns, and so homicides are in the country about 20,000 a year. So it's a number of different indicators which build you up. You've got the potential for terrorist acts, more so than what you've got in a number of other nations as well. And then you do have the external ones, and whether and this isn't a moral judgment, because obviously people can argue that the US is the world's policeman. I won't enter into the debate. But you are involved in a number of conflicts, and you have got a lot of people dying, and you've got a fairly large percentage of your GDP spent on the military. So that's
that last statistic is a component of your index.
Yes, yeah. Percentage of GDP spent on the military. Mm-hmm. We did that rather than go absolute, because we think it was a fairer measure. If it was absolute, obviously it'd be much different. Fair number of troops per 100,000 population. Now, we're not making moral judgments. We're not saying it's right or wrong. We're just counting the stats, and we'll let other people interpret. But certainly some countries are more peaceful than others, and by studying the most peaceful countries, we do actually get the ability to learn about positive peace. So we're, from a statistical perspective, not so interested in countries which are halfway down or necessarily at the bottom.
The only point I would make is that by this analysis, we would have ranked much lower than Switzerland in 1943 or 1944. And I think people are probably happy that we played the role we did in those years.
It's probably contributed to world peace.
That's true.
That's probably right. That's exactly right. Sir, coming up.
Hi, I'm Jeff Swedberg with the QED Group. I've got a question about the metrics involved in an index like the Global Peace Index. There are other similar ones, such as the Failed States Index. And a question is, to what degree does the U.S. government actually use indices like these for making operational or strategic or resource decisions?
I think Steve's first.
Sure. Okay, I won't actually make a comment on the US government, but certainly you'll find it up on the World Bank website. They use the statistics in conflict compilations. The OECD, if you go into their Wiki Progress website at the moment, you'll find the Global Peace Index actually featured on the front page. SIPRI, that's the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, which is probably one of the top think tanks in the world. They've put out the Bible on international conflict. They've got a chapter in it on the Global Peace Index, and I can keep going. UNDP uses it in their training courses, and there's many, many more. So the index itself, you can debate it, and it may not be perfect. Some metrics may be much stronger than some others, but it is a body of work. It holds up statistically and is well used by highly credible organisations.
And the question is it used by the US government to allocate resources?
As I mentioned earlier, my predecessor set into motion the creation, or he encouraged the creation within the US government of an index. And that's become a measure for informing policymakers of potential areas of disorder. And to that extent, it is a useful policy tool. But point of fact, which place of disorder becomes a place of great interest to the United States is not based according to any indices, any index, or according to any matrix. It's a political decision which will be determined by senior policymakers as they look at countries around the world.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Allison Johnson, and I'm building a smart power initiative at Northrop Grumman Corporation, where we're very interested in looking at this nexus between diplomacy, development, and defense. And I would like to turn to the question, actually, that Ambassador Taylor precipitated in giving us the comparison of our levels of defense operations and defense personnel versus the strong work that your area is trying to do at the Department of State. And I would like to know, in an ideal world, how you would like to see the resources for SCRS in terms of 1,000 is a nice number, and I know in talking to folks there in the last 5 years, it's great to get to the 1,000. But in terms of really being able to impact diplomacy and development in the field by pulling the whole of government to an Afghanistan, we would obviously need much more in terms of personnel. So in an ideal world, if you were able to get more appropriations from the United States Congress and so forth, what are the real numbers that are going to make a difference and an impact for AFPAC or Iraq? And how do you think we could get there to get the civilian response, maybe not equivalent to the military response, but close? Thank you.
Okay. We're building now to, as I mentioned before, 1264. Our medium-term objective would be to build a civilian response corps of over 4,200. If we had a corps that large, we'd be able to maintain in the field at all times, if there was a need, about 1,100 or 1,200 people. I think that would be enough to carry out an operation on the scale of Afghanistan right now. It wouldn't be possible with that number to carry out both in Afghanistan and Iraq, but I suspect that there's not going to be much appetite in Washington for doing future Afghanistans and Iraqs. I think with a core of 4,000, the ability to sustain, again, 1,100 or 1,200 in the field, we'd be able to handle many small and medium-term crises, especially in the conflict prevention area, that would save us a lot of money, save us a lot of lives, and serve our national interests. It's possible to develop a capacity beyond 4,000, but I think for the medium term, that's a suitable objective.
Very good. Yes, ma'am. And why don't we have these the last two questions, but they can be, we got plenty of time here, so we can do that. And then we'll have an opportunity for Steve and John to make final comments, and that will be good. Yes, ma'am.
Kelly McBride from the Americas Program at the Carter Center. And just a historical reminder, before we use the language about recovery and stabilization, the Salvador peace process and the support to the U.S. government and also the international community provided to El Salvador in the 80s and the 90s, it's been very successful for all the warts that El Salvador has. I think the proof is the fact that a year ago, The guerrillas, which became a political party, they won the presidency, and they've had a number of mayorships, and they have people in the Congress. So the political transition there is pretty complete. But I think it's an important historical peace process, peacekeeping mission to remember.
I agree, and I would put that in the category of a society racked by conflict where you basically had two relatively competent competing forces, and they reached a deal, helped by the international community, especially the UN and the United States, and it's worked. I agree.
Say anything?
Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Jacques Mushagasha. I'm with Solidarity International Foundation, where we also believe that there is a relation between development and peace. And as you said it's hard to have development in a country or in a region where there is no peace. But now, if it's been proved, I'm going to talk about DRC, my country. It's been proved that the conflict that we have in DRC today, the root cause of that conflict, it's the minerals. And those international companies who went there, who are there to get out the minerals. So now I would like to know how and my question is to the ambassador, how his office can or is going to deal with those kind of conflicts which are not basically, don't have the roots between the people of the country, but from outsiders who come to get the minerals or the natural resources. Thank you.
Very good. John.
What you describe seems to be a political or a political economic problem which might not require the efforts of my office. If there's a case of outright aggression, well, you have various mechanisms to deal with that. If there's a case of economic exploitation, there are other mechanisms to deal with it. But it is true, there may be countries where those contribute to chaos, in which case we might be at play. In that case, we would want to develop a mission, develop a strategy which includes the capabilities that deal with traditional diplomatic problems, traditional economic problems.
Steve.
Look, I thought I'd take that just to drop a little bit of a good news story, actually. So if we go over the last 4 years and we look at the correlations of regions and what have been the regions which have improved the most in peace, the best performing one's Sub-Saharan Africa. So the piece of it's actually increased. And on that's on the back of a less organised conflict, and less death through conflict, and better relationships with neighbouring states. But if we look over the last decade with Sub-Saharan Africa, it's had the highest level of GDP growth since it got independence from colonisation. And child mortality rates on average have been dropping 2% per annum. So there's stuff which is really working in Africa, and quite often we can get locked into the things which aren't working, but there's a lot which is going right in Africa, and part of that comes back to a sustained period now of 30 or 40 years of development in Africa, of higher education rates, so people are becoming more knowledgeable, and a lot better governance. The region in the world which came in second best in terms of improvement was the Middle East. And would you believe that was on the back of the drop of improved relations with neighbouring states and expenditure of a percentage of GDP expend on the military, which is contrary to probably the views most of us actually hold in our heads, or at least it was for mine.
Steve, let me just push you on that. In particular, the Middle East being the second most improved region. I go back to your opening statement where you talked about absence of violence and then broke it down into governance, strong economies, and equitable distribution of resources. I don't think of kind of Middle East countries as being particularly strong on equitable distribution of resources. But on all three of these... So
now, what we've got to realise, the most unpeaceful region in the world is sub-Saharan African, and the second most unpeaceful region in the world is the Middle East.
Okay, we've got improvements.
Yeah, in the middle, we need to be a little bit careful there. But you have got countries like, but there are role models there. You have got countries like Qatar, which comes in at 15 on the Global Peace Index, and certain countries there have got really quite good social security systems. They do actually spread the resources, even though some of their leaders we may not like very much at all.
Very good. I'm going to give John and Steve the opportunity for kind of summary comments, final comments, and then we will wrap up. Steve. John, sorry.
I just think it's been a good discussion. Welcome the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Good summary, great summary. Steve.
Oh, look, it's been excellent being here, but I'd just like, my final word is peace we don't know enough about. We need to really study peace, understand it better. There's a lot in understanding the positive and then enlivening those factors within societies rather than just studying the negatives and what's not working. The Global Peace Index is a fact-based approach to try and help with this. And peace actually has a strong correlation with the economy, and by improving peace, we can actually improve our wealth.
And from my standpoint, this has been very informative. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope others have done the same. I think we can all agree that if you have a choice between peace and non-peace, you should choose peace. And it would be good for economics, it would be good for development. But the hard question is the one we've kind of, where you don't have peace, or where you're trying to get to peace. How does that work in terms of this development work that we're trying to do? I think there's a lot more work yet to be done. So I hope that SID will continue to contribute to this kind of work, and we want to thank the organizers of this. And please join me in thanking our two panelists. Thank you very much.